Thank you, Director, for joining us today, and I welcome to allow you to give your opening statement at this time.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thanks to Chairman Joyce, Ranking Member Cuellar, and members of the subcommittee for the opportunity to testify regarding the FY24 President's budget for CISA. As the nation's cyber defense agency and the National Coordinator for Critical Infrastructure Security and Resilience, CISA leads the national effort to understand, manage, and reduce risk to the cyber and physical infrastructure that Americans rely on every hour of every day. And this mission has never been more urgent as our nation faces a wide array of threats that could undermine our national security, our economic prosperity, and our public health and safety, including the preeminent cyber threat we face from China. I joined CISA nearly 2 years ago as the agency was still leading the national recovery from the widespread Russian cyber espionage campaign known as SolarWinds. In those dark days, in the aftermath of intrusions into many of our government's most critical systems, we came to several realizations. We realized our visibility into cyber threats and vulnerabilities was wildly incomplete. We realized our capability to ingest, analyze, and act upon cyber risk data was inadequate, and we realized that the breadth of cyber threat facing our country required a new model of public-private partnership characterized by persistent operational collaboration. Since that time, I'm proud that Congress, the administration, CISA, and our partners have all stepped up to the challenge, and we've received sustained, generous, bipartisan investment from Congress and invaluable new authorities. And we've worked to be good stewards of this investment, executing 99.87% of our one-year FY22 funds. This year's budget builds upon this progress, requesting $3.1 billion for CISA, $149 million more than what Congress appropriated to us in FY23, reflecting the administration's commitment to our important mission and matching the strong and steady investment Congress has made in CISA, including in areas that we identified as essential in the aftermath of SolarWinds. Specifically, we've made significant progress in expanding our visibility into cyber threats and vulnerabilities across the government and the private sector. Visibility is critical. If we can identify threats and vulnerabilities with speed and breadth, we can provide more support to victims, share more actionable info, and deliver more tailored guidance to reduce risk. The resources requested will meaningfully advance this capability, first by providing investments in continuous diagnostics and mitigation program, enabling greater real-time visibility into threats and vulnerabilities for every federal civilian agency. Second, by enabling us to modernize the array of cyber sensors to protect federal agencies. Third, by supporting the expansion of the Cyber Sentry program. And finally, by allowing us to implement CERCIA, the Cyber Incident Reporting for Critical Infrastructure Act, which Congress passed a year ago with broad bipartisan support. The budget provides $97 million to ensure the staffing processes and technical capabilities to successfully implement CERCIA and use incident reportings to limit the impact of cyber incidents targeting Americans. As our visibility increases, our access to data increases, and our need to conduct big data analysis becomes increasingly acute. That's why we requested $425 million for the Cyber Analysis and Data System, or CADS, to provide a modern, scalable, analytic infrastructure for our cyber operators. And CADS is a foundational step to building the joint collaborative environment that will enable collaborative analysis of cyber risk data across the government and private sector. Now, at the same time, we can't do this alone. This is about collective cyber defense. We have to continue to bring together partners from government, the private sector, and the international community to address shared risks. The budget sustains $97 million for the JCDC, the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative, the nation's focal point for cyber defense collaboration and planning. As we did in the lead up to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, this will allow us to increase the number of cyber defense plans, expand persistent collaboration efforts, and improve our ability to conduct timely notifications of cyber threats before damaging incidents occur. Of equal importance, we have to continue to grow and mature as a new agency in order to fully execute our essential mission. The budget consolidates mission support funding for dedicated efforts to secure our networks, to report with transparency, to acquire new technology, and to enable the continued growth of our workforce. Over just the past 2 years, we've expanded our team by more than 560 people, hiring more than double the people in the last 2 years than we hired in the previous 2, and we project FY23 will be our best hiring year yet. Our funding request is essential to sustaining this progress. Before I close, I want to thank this committee. Because of your continued support and generosity, we've had a remarkable year, working in every state and territory to provide cyber and physical and chemical security assistance to our partners and dedicated support to public safety and emergency communications communities. As one team unified behind our shared mission, we'll continue to operate in an efficient and cost-effective manner. There is no shortage of work ahead of us, and I look forward to working with you during the appropriations cycle to continue strengthening CISA and, by extension, the security and resilience of our nation's infrastructure. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Director Easley. And I wanted to get that out there ahead of time because some of us, this is the kickoff of the season for us in appropriations. And so members may come and go, but I know they all wanted to hear your opening statement. And so if they come and go, it's not meant to be disrespectful. They were just trying to attend other hearings at the same time. And I truly thank you for your military service as well as your leadership here today. In 2018, Congress authorized CISA to protect the nation's cyber and physical critical infrastructure. We invested heavily in the operational agency and its mission over the last 3 years, increasing the budget by 44% from $2 billion to $2.9 billion. The president's latest request will put you over $3 billion. That's a fair amount of dollars. Today, I would like to drill down and quantify the return on that investment for the American people, as CISA's mission has never been more important. Nation-state actors backed by China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, and others are targeting government and private sector networks to steal intellectual property, probe our defense, disrupt operations, cause panic, and inflict financial consequences on the homeland. Simultaneously, cyber criminals are using ransomware to prey on vulnerable groups, including schools, local governments, and hospitals for financial gain. These attacks can cost millions of dollars when a ransom is paid and also create additional costs from lost productivity and disrupted operations. CISA is charged with coordinating the defense of 16 critical infrastructure sectors, including energy, healthcare, manufacturing, transportation, communications, and defense industrial base, among others. We all remember the Colonial Pipeline, as you brought up, the ransomware that attacked and disrupted the flow of fuel to a large portion of our country, resulting in nearly $5 million in damages. Imagine the impact of a coordinated larger-scale attack akin to the Nord Stream pipeline attack in the Baltic Sea last fall. Increased vigilance on both the cyber and physical infrastructure front is critical to ensuring both our national and economic security and public trust. I look forward to hearing how CISA is leveraging its resources to harden our defenses against adversarial nation-state-sponsored threat actors, cyber criminals, and other nefarious actors. But not all challenges CISA face are external. The rapid growth of the agency over the past few years brought hiring challenges, management and communication difficulties, and organizational growing pains. Without the right people, CISA cannot fully carry out its mission regardless of its investment. With the private sector also competing for cyber talent, I'm interested to hear how you are attracting, hiring, developing, and retaining employees. As the country faces continually evolving threats, our workforce too must evolve. Rapid technological developments will continue to dramatically change network security, and CISA will need personnel with the right tools, training, and tenacity to meet those critical networks. I look forward to a robust discussion today and working together to make sure we see the results from our significant investment in CISA. I'll turn to my colleague, Mr. Cuellar, for any opening remarks he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and again, I congratulate you on your new role as chairman, and I certainly welcome the new members on the committee itself. So I want to say, first of all, congratulations, and again, as you know, we do have a few members that are coming back. I know Ms. Lauren Underwood, Illinois, welcome back. She's been in the committee and appreciate all the good work. And we got two new Democratic members, Congressman David Throne of Maryland. Again, we welcome you and all the work that you're doing on fentanyl and other work like that. And then Mr. Ed Case will be joining us also. So again, good morning, Director Easley. It's good to see you again. I'm still very impressed. There's a story why I have this. Very impressed not only by your talents, but by the work that you're doing. As we all know, cyber threats pose a significant risk to our national security, our economy, and our way of life. These threats are posed by individual bad actors, transnational criminal organizations, foreign adversaries like state-sponsored groups and nations. CISA plays a vital role in partnering with other federal agencies, state and local governments, critical infrastructure owners, and operators to protect against emerging involvement threats. Again, we appreciate your leadership. And at this, I'll go ahead because I do want to start into questions, but I do appreciate Director Easterly for all the work that you're doing.
Thank you. And your statement will be entered into the record. I want to start on the return on investment that we discussed. As I mentioned in my remarks, Congress provided CISA with substantial increases in funding over the last 3 fiscal years due to the importance of the mission. I'd like to drill down on the specific return on that investment for the American people. This is in addition to the more than $780 million provided through the American Rescue Plan and infrastructure law last Congress. Director, can you quantify for the subcommittee how much safer the homeland is today than it was before these funding enhancements for CISA? And specifically, in both the cybersecurity and infrastructure security buckets, how do you measure success?
Thanks very much for asking that question. You know, when I came to CISA, our mission was to lead the national effort to understand and manage risk. And we actually changed the mission statement to say that we were leading and managing and reducing risk, recognizing that we have to be able to measure and quantify those investments. That said, Chairman, that is a very difficult thing to do. So we are starting on this journey about how we actually measure not only things, activities or performance, but actually how we measure effectiveness. So for example, one of the things that we're very focused on, given the incredible investments that we've gotten from Congress after the solar winds incident, as I mentioned, through the Rescue Plan Act, as well as our budget later this year, were investments designed to increase our visibility on the federal civilian executive branch network, so the .gov, because effectively we saw that we were blind. So many of the new authorities and the money that we were given allowed us to instantiate technology that we call EDR, endpoint detection and response capabilities across the .gov that allows us now to do persistent hunting based on new authorities that we've been given so that we have much more visibility to be able to say we are seeing malicious activity on those networks, and we do this obviously in concert with federal agencies. It enables us to say there's risky technology, like, for example, TikTok on federal government devices, or risky technology from foreign adversaries on some of our technology. It also allows us to understand if there's vulnerabilities that need to be remediated. But actually measuring that is a challenge. But I want to read you some of the things that we're specifically focused on here. Percentage of federal agencies that are sharing current and accurate data through our CDM dashboard. So now we have a way to actually look across the .gov to see what agencies have what risks teed up to us. Percentage that have developed internal vulnerability management and patching, a vulnerability disclosure policy, end-of-life service and end-of-service policy, voluntary adoptions of our shared services like protective domain name systems that allows us to see malicious traffic transiting the internet, and then finally, that percentage that's covered by that EDR technology. So we are, again, looking to measure aspects of instantiation of capabilities. What we hope to be able to get at the end of the full maturation, and much of our budget is focused on maturation, is actually showing number of incidents that will be reduced. Now, the last thing I'd say here, sir, as a measure of reducing risk, we don't have a lot of visibility into the overall ecosystem, but you all gave us CERCIA last year, the Cyber Incident Reporting for Critical Infrastructure Act. That will be game-changing in allowing us to actually understand the ecosystem so we can say, here are the number of critical incidents that occurred across our critical infrastructure this year, and then we can measure the reduction given all of the improvements that we've put in place. So we are on our journey to be able to give you very quantifiable metrics to allow us to articulate that return on investment.
Thank you, Director. And as you think about the funds CISA receives, which are the most critical for deterring and preventing attacks on the homeland?
Well, as we had to make hard choices in our budget this year, sir, you saw that we are putting new monies, we're requesting new monies in the budget to focus on these cyber threats. We have built out capabilities over the past 20 years for integrated security across physical security, but where we're seeing threats from nation states, China, as I mentioned, the preeminent, Russia, very focused on that with our Shields Up campaign, Iran, North Korea, and cyber criminals. We have seen ransomware as a scourge on schools, on municipalities, on hospitals, and we really want to drive down that risk there. So some of the investments that we're making are focused on our field forces, which are working with state and local and with smaller infrastructure to be able to drive down risk on those entities. But the big ticket items are really around CERCIA, so that we have the staff, the processes, and technical infrastructure to be able to receive reports, to triage them, and to respond to them so we can drive down risk to the nation. The other big investments have to do with the federal civilian enterprise, where we play the role as operational lead for federal cybersecurity. So the CAD system, the cyber analytic and data system, essentially we've been bringing in a lot more data, but we have to have a system to provide us cyber analytics, to integrate, to enrich, to correlate it, so we can make use and make sense of that data to drive down risk. And then finally, some of the maturation around our continuous diagnostics and mitigation team, which is really the foundational system for cybersecurity. And part of that is the maturation of the National Cyber Protection System, some of the things that we're doing with Einstein. So these investments are critical to actually take advantage of the investments that you've given us, because it really is an evolution of maturity. To get there, we have to be able to evolve with these new systems, in particular, the analytics.
Thank you very much, Director. And I now recognize our ranking member, Mr. Cuellar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also want to follow a line of questions that the chairman brought up. Back in 2010, I changed legislation that modernized the performance results-oriented government legislation that got passed in the 1990s. And in there, in the 2010 legislation, we're asking agencies to make sure they have their mission statement, their objectives, key performance measures, which are some of the ones I have here. And I'll be asking every agency before a committee about their performance measures. And I've looked at some of the key performance measures, which are the big ones. And again, I'm not blaming you, but this has probably been in place for a while. But one of the things, members, that we need to realize that in the state, and I was asking who's been in the state legislature, because in the state legislatures, we use a lot of the performance measures, and it's a different process. And I was trying to do this in 2010. It's a little different in DC, trying to change things. But here, we leave the agencies to develop their own performance measures. In state legislatures, I think in most state legislatures, the Congress or the legislature and the agencies actually sit down and agree on certain measures. Because, for example, one of the key measures that you have here, or that the agency has, that's supposed to be a key measure, is key measure, landline priority calls successfully connected. So is that important? Is that a key measure that we ought to be looking at? Or should we come up with, instead of measuring activity, we ought to measure results? If we put $1, what's the bang for that $1? And I'm hoping that somewhere down the line, we all can get involved, where we can have certain measures that we can negotiate, if I can use that term, or work out with you, then, and hopefully be part of the report language where we can actually look at the measures. Because right now, all of this are on websites, and I don't know if you look at every website out there, and it doesn't. And I think this is why what the chairman was saying, and I'm in agreement with him, that if we put in money, what are we getting for that $1? For example, as the chairman mentioned, back in December 2020, we added $650 million in supplemental funding to CISA through the American Rescue Plan Act to increase and enhance the work that you're doing. And the question is, as the chairman asked, so given all that investments plus other monies that the chairman mentioned, describe how CISA is better positioned than it was in 2020 to protect against and respond to cybersecurity attacks. And one of the ways we could look at is the performance measures. But if we're looking at, and I don't want to go through all of them, but if we're looking at how many landlines calls that you connect, I don't think that's the best measure to look at. So we're hoping, one is, if you can answer the question with all that investment specifically, how are you in a better position now to protect the public? But I'm hoping that we can look at and ask members to start looking at every agency we put in $1, what's the bang? Not measure activity. I don't want to count how many pencils we have out there. I want to see results on that.
Yeah. 100%. And I think you've seen our strategic plan as well, where we
Yes.
have representative outcomes that are about outcomes, not activities, right? Measures of effectiveness, not measures of performance. This is the agency strategic plan, but every one of my divisions and mission enabling offices has annual operating plans that then shreds out in more detail what we are looking to achieve. And I would love for us to come back to this committee to be able to talk to you, to get your guidance and counsel about what you would like to see. I think we're moving in the right direction on this. I had the same challenge when I was in the private sector at Morgan Stanley, where we were putting hundreds of millions of dollars into the cybersecurity program, and return of investment was things not happening. So, you know, at a broad level, bad things not happening is hard to measure. So what we want to do is get more granular with the visibility that we've gotten out of that $650 million to say this is how we've reduced the instance of bad things happening. And better metrics are things like, how have we recovered most effectively? How have we reduced our time to actually detect something and then to respond to it and recover from it? And that's the direction we're going in with metrics. So I would love to spend more time on a deep dive with you on that.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Cuellar. Recognize Sheriff Rutherford for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, it's really great to see you again, and I'd be remiss if I didn't thank you all first and foremost for the visit to the district that we had. I think building those local relationships is huge, and I know you're working hard on that. It was very well received by my community, so thank you.
Thank you, sir.
And I want to kind of follow up on the line of questioning so far, and talking about CERCIA. So we're requiring the critical infrastructure to report. First of all, I know it's only been a year, but how has that been received? Are we getting the reporting that you think we should? Can you just give me an idea how that's rolling out?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for asking, because I think this is one of the most important things that has been happening, that happened legislatively since probably the establishment of CISA in 2018. So as you know, we are largely a voluntary agency. So I do want to thank you for hosting that meeting with my team. They loved it, and they love to spend time with constituents in the field. So I would ask any of you who wants to meet with our CISA team, please do so, because that's where the rubber meets the road, right? So with CERCIA, we are in a rulemaking process, sir. So we've been working over the past year to essentially put the infrastructure in place so that we can start defining what we need to receive from the private sector within 72 hours, how we define a covered entity, how we define a covered incident, and we are moving forward to actually create the notice of rulemaking, which should come out in March of next year, and then look for the final rule, which will be implemented in September of 25. We have worked really hard to make this a consultative process. Having come from a highly regulated industry in finance, I am very, very sensitive to not creating chaos when there are all kinds of regulations that are out there. We want to do this in a way that allows us to render assistance to the victim and then drive down risk to the nation. So we had 27 sessions, 10 in person, 17 virtual, where we talked to private sector to get their feedback. We did a request for information where we got over 100 comments back. So we're putting together that rule based on everything we've heard from the private sector. That's hugely important to make sure that we do this right. The other important thing is to ensure that this is harmonized. What we can't have is a bunch of different agencies asking slightly different questions to the private sector, because all we're going to create is chaos. Right. Then it becomes a box-checking compliance exercise, not about reducing risk to the nation. So we're very mindful of leveraging the Cyber Incident Reporting Council that was in CERCIA. The other things with CERCIA, which we're already getting after, are the Joint Ransomware Task Force to help reduce risk to the nation through our ransomware vulnerability warning pilot that was mandated in the legislation, as well as our pre-notification of ransomware incidents that's driving down impact across the country. So legislation moving forward, so we're being consultative about it. But the additional monies we asked for was really really about putting the technical infrastructure in place to allow us to be able to receive this massive amount of new reporting, to analyze it, to correlate it, to enrich it, and then to use it to respond, but really to reduce risk to other sectors in the rest of the nation.
Good. And you have subpoena power if they do not report. My question, though, is there any teeth behind that? Because you know, from experience, I think we see that there's quite a lot of reluctance for some of these organizations, maybe not in the critical infrastructure when it's governmental, but others. There's a lack of openness, I think, in wanting to lay out their problems.
Yeah.
Do we need to put more teeth into the reporting piece? Because I really don't see any teeth in that.
Yeah. You're right. I think this was a hard-fought set of legislation, and a lot of views came in from the private sector. So there are not a lot of sticks in terms of enforcement and compliance. If, in fact, we hear of an incident and it's not reported to us, we can use admin subpoena power. You know, what I'd say, though, is we need a cultural transformation, frankly, in order for us to have a sustainable approach to cybersecurity. This has to be about collaboration over self-preservation. I know that companies, because I was in one of them, worry about their reputation, they worry about their stock price. But at the end of the day, the reporting came to CISA because we have the most robust authorities for information sharing and protection of data. We are not here to name, to shame, to stab the wounded. Right. We are here to render assistance and then to use that data, very importantly, to protect the rest of the ecosystem. If you're in a neighborhood and your neighbor gets robbed, you're going to want to know that so you can actually lock your doors and put your guard dog out. It's important for our collective defense. We are facing some very, very serious threats to our nation, to our critical infrastructure. If we don't work together to put collaboration over self-preservation and make sure that we are connected in this highly connected ecosystem, that we are not looking out to protect the nation, we will fail. So I am very much hoping that we're going to get the reports that we've asked for. And quite frankly, sir, as part of our Shields Up campaign, we actually asked entities to reduce their threshold and voluntarily report to us. And we got in a ton of reports about potential scanning and activity. So I am optimistic, as I always am, about the successful implementation of the legislation.
Thank you very much. And I see my time's expired. I yield back, but I'll say, Mr. Chairman, we may need to look at some teeth. We'll see how it goes. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Sheriff. Ms. Underwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Easterly, thanks for being with us. It's good to see you again.
You too, ma'am.
First, I want to talk about election security, which is a critical pillar of our national security. Over the past several elections, we've seen foreign adversaries like Russia and Iran deploy more sophisticated and brazen campaigns in attempts to influence and interfere with our elections. And most recently, in our 2022 midterm elections, we saw China using fake social media accounts with the goal of sowing distrust into our elections. Something analysts noticed was a shift in strategy for China. Director Easterly, can you tell us more about emerging threats and trends you're seeing recently when it comes to foreign attempts at election interference and from China in particular?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the question. Just to level set, as you know, we were designated in 2017 as the Sector Risk Management Agency. So we don't obviously run elections. We make sure that state and local election officials have the resources, the capability, and the intelligence that they need. And 2022 was my first election with these local officials. I will tell you, when we were first designated, there was massive pushback. They didn't want anything to do with the federal government. But through years and years of building partnership, that is very solid now. And what I hear from state and local election officials is that they are increasingly asking for more of our resources. In fact, we just met with
I'm sorry, Director,
them.
I asked about the threats
Yes, ma'am.
from
So
China.
what they're telling us and what we're seeing, very complicated threat environment, cyber threats from nation state actors, physical threats, to polling places, to election officials, insider threats, and then the threats of foreign influence and disinformation. As you mentioned, we saw it from Russia, we saw it from Iran in 2020, we saw it in China. I have serious concerns, particularly given some of the capabilities that China has, like TikTok, to be able to use their data, the data that they've collected from us, capabilities to be able to influence the American public. So we are working very hard to make sure that we are amplifying the trusted voices of local officials, putting out election literacy information, and then providing them all the resources that they need so that American people can have confidence in the integrity of their elections.
Great. Next, I want to talk about who the burden of cybersecurity generally falls on, because frankly, I think our approach is backwards. You and I have compared cybersecurity to auto safety. If a car today didn't have seatbelts, or if an airbag didn't deploy, we wouldn't blame the driver. We would hold the auto manufacturer accountable. Cars undergo rigorous safety and crash tests before they can be sold to consumers, and roadways themselves have speed limits and traffic lights, all to ensure the end user is safe as possible while driving. Cybersecurity products should be treated the same way. But in our current system, we leave individuals with no choice but to shoulder cyber risks and consequences instead of the technology providers who have more of the resources, capacity, and visibility to protect consumers from those risks in the first place. This model is not safe, sensible, or sustainable. So, Director Easterly, how can we as policymakers help shift the burden away from the end user? And what does a more sustainable cyber model look like? And how is CISA helping us get there?
Thank you for asking that question, because I 100% agree with you. We are not in a sustainable place. So as you said, what we need to make sure is that we change the incentives. We've normalized a world where technology comes to us inherently unsafe. And then we developed a multi-billion-dollar cybersecurity industry to basically deal with the fact that we're all walking around with unsafe technology. So we have to change the incentives. Right now, the incentives are all about speed to market and competing on features and cost reduction. We have to make safety baked in, and we have to make products safe by design. We've asked for radical transparency so that we understand that consumers, so the burden isn't placed on them, so they know what they're buying. We've asked for technology providers to bake in security and to design in security. And as the National Cybersecurity Strategy suggested, ma'am, we may need to look at certain liability. For whether manufacturers have duty of care to be able to protect those consumers. I realize this may be a long time coming. It was 1965 when Ralph Nader wrote Unsafe at Any Speed, and 83 when we had seatbelt legislation, but we absolutely have to get there. Take the burden off small businesses, take the burden off consumers, and push it on those most capable of bearing it.
And I think that CISA is well equipped to help lead that charge forward as we work to make sure that we have robust protections for everybody, including the end user. Director Easterly, thanks so much for appearing before our committee today. I yield back.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Ms. Underwood. Recognize Mr. Mr. Newsom for any comments he may have or questions.
I can't turn that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chairman Joyce, Ranking Member. Also, thank you very much, Director. Thanks for being with us today. So I come from the state of Washington, and we've had, it seems like, more than our fair share of issues on some of our local and I believe locally owned state and federal power substations.
Yep.
They've gotten a lot of press recently. I'd served on this committee prior to my term now, and asked people, your predecessors, about the security of our grid, and are we keeping up security protocols at the national, federal level? So let me ask you about some of these 16 critical areas that you're responsible for. Could you talk to me about CISA's energy-specific, sector-specific plan, the SSP? And don't get me wrong here. I know cyber is vitally important, and in fact, some of the briefings I've had keep me up at night worrying about some of these things. But have we focused on cyber at the expense of some of our physical security? I know it's a balance. In the coming budget year, do you think there's a need to update the sector-specific plans? the energy plan, for instance, hasn't been updated, I believe, since 2015, and you can update me on that if that isn't correct. Should we revisit the National Infrastructure Protection Plan as well? I do have some concerns because the president's budget looks to me proposing a decrease in the overall infrastructure security account. So just a rhetorical question, if we can't secure our physical assets here at home, how do we tackle cybersecurity and safeguard those new technologies that are coming, like fusion, the hydrogen, the small modular reactors? Seems to me we've got to be able to do both. So your response.
100% agree with you, which is why our mission is to reduce risk to cyber and physical infrastructure. So, in addition to being America's cyber defense agency, we serve as the national coordinator for critical infrastructure resilience and security, and that was what was in the statute. So the SRMAs for the 16 sectors, we actually serve as 8 for 8 sectors. But there are other departments and agencies that serve for, say, for energy, electricity, it's the Department of Energy. And so our role is to work hand in hand with the sector risk management agencies who are responsible for updating those sector-specific plans to ensure that we are taking a cross-sector coordinated approach to driving down both physical and cyber risk to the most systemically important entities. So that's why Congress had the insight to have a coordinator role, because it used to just be various sectors operating in silos, and so now bringing that together, knowing the dependencies are so important. So with respect to sector plans, the plan was to do the National Infrastructure Plan update. We're responsible for that. But we've been asked to first get done PPD 21. The White House is working on an update to the Critical Infrastructure Presidential Policy Directive. We will then do the national plan, and then the sector-specific plans will follow to include the 8 that we're responsible for, as well as the election subsector. To your point on physical, our request, the president's request in 24 was actually the same as the request in 23. The Congress generously gave us plus-ups on the physical security side in 23. We didn't annualize them, sir, because we had to make tough decisions, and we wanted to double down on our investments in cyber given that threat. All that said, we are continuing to do our work around school safety, more important than ever given the tragic events yesterday in Nashville, our work around the Office of Bombing Prevention, and all of the work we do on the physical security side. But one of the things that we've recognized is we can't look at these as separate things. There is the convergence of cyber and physical threats. So the convergence, so cyber threats to physical buildings, we have to look at these in a converged way, which is why we're building out an integrated security model in the field where our physical security advisors and our cybersecurity advisors look at these things together so we can maximally reduce risk to our national infrastructure.
So you brought that up. Let me just ask you to delve into that just a little bit deeper in the seconds I have left. It looks to me like there's a reduction in the security programs that would primarily benefit the K-12 school system. So
The $3 million that was plussed up in 23 by the Congress, sir.
well, the request is 11.8 million less than the prior fiscal year. So just looking
Yeah.
at the chart that you provided.
Yes, sir. Let me follow up with you. That program is not hugely funded, so I think it was just $3 million that was decremented. That's what I have in my notes, but happy to follow up. And again, we can always do more with more. So if the Congress wants to put back that specific money, that's all about creating safety for schools. We would certainly take advantage of it.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Again,
Yes, sir.
thanks for being here.
My
I
pleasure.
yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Newhouse. Mr. Trone, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Ranking Member Cuellar. Just want to say it's a pleasure to be here in this subcommittee, and you folks always work well together. You're totally bipartisan, and I just love the atmosphere that generates. So thank you for having us here. Director Easterly, we had a wonderful meeting, and you were most helpful and answered a bucket load of questions, and I can't thank you enough for going back to public service and leaving the corporate world, and you left all the money behind to be here for this. God bless you.
Thank you, sir.
Cyber area, as a business person, all my life, I just checked with my CIO and asked him, how many hits do we get in our small company, literally every day? And he said over 150 from nation states and actors, mostly over in Western Europe. So a company that doesn't even trade in anything of national security, we're getting hits all the time. I look at Maryland and all these mom and pop businesses that can't afford the cyber infrastructure that I've put in my company, which basically whatever those guys need, we get them. Because if we don't get it right in cyber, we're done. And it's just that simple. So, but in Maryland, over 340 breaches last year. So Maryland was the 5th worst in the country on breaches. So business really needs the help. And what Mrs. Underwood talked about was the product themselves don't come out safe. So we're certainly supportive of that point. I think that's a great point. But things not happening is the key, and it is hard to measure. But tell me, for businesses looking to take their cybersecurity program up to the next level, how's their best way to connect with CISA and stay up to date on the latest threats? Because the problem is they don't stay up to date. Then they're vulnerable.
Yeah, 100%. Thank you for the question on that. And thank you also for your leadership, because one of the things to get to the point we were talking about on sustainable cybersecurity is corporate cyber responsibility. We need CEOs and leaders to actually put the resources that they need into their cybersecurity and to really empower and resource their CIOs and CISOs. That's what everybody needs to be doing, just as you are, sir, so thank you. On small businesses in particular, right, 33 million, 99.9%, median size is between 10 and 20 people. I think they just don't have those resources. So we've provided we did last year the Cybersecurity Action Plan, and we provided a kit to what are those easy things that can be done. And you can reach out and look. You can actually sign up for all of our products, our advisories, and our alerts. You can take advantage of the kit if you're a small business on those basic steps that you can do. We put out cybersecurity performance goals that are on our website that are basically breaking it down to what are the top things you need to do by cost, complexity, and impact to drive down risk. And then we have a field force, a growing field force of cybersecurity advisors, cybersecurity state coordinators who are there to help, advise, provide assistance, and provide a massive amount of free services, government and industry, to help drive down risk. So we recognize how important that is for some of the smaller businesses, particularly because some of these small and medium enterprises are in our supply chain in critical infrastructure. So we have to work together collectively to take responsibility as a nation to drive down risk.
That's a great idea. We're certainly going to get back to you and figure out how to get that stuff out to our chambers of commerce, our rotaries, because these folks are they're helpless. And they get hit, they get ransomwared, they get shut down, and they can't absorb it. They have no resiliency. So thank you for that, and I'm going to follow up. Next quick question was, to run a business or run any organization, you've got to have enough people and the right people. And that's where we get back to your situation on personnel, because it is so hard to find the talent in this area across the country. So you set up, Homeland Security launched the Cyber Talent Management System back in November 2021. Recruit, retain personnel, and the process has been tedious and difficult, and I understand that. So how does FY24 request support the agency's recruitment and workforce goals, including the continued implementation of the Cyber Talent Management Program?
Yeah, thanks so much for asking. Since I got here day one in July of 2021, we have made hiring a top priority here to include using some of those new authorities for the Cyber Talent Management System. By the end of 21, we'd hired 200 more people than we hired the year before. 2022, more than 21. 23, we're on track to hire 600 people using those new authorities, but using a full range of other authorities to enable us to be able to more quickly recruit people and then to bring them into a culture where they feel like they can make impact. As you well know, as somebody who has run a business for a long time, sir, we're not paying a big salary, right? People come here because of mission. We're looking for people who want a purposeful mission, who want a culture of collaboration and innovation, who want an environment that combines the entrepreneurialism of a startup with the stability of a federal job. And so those are the kind of people that we've been able to tap into across the country. As I said, 516 people last year, 600 people. We're going to be down to, at the end of 24, we're going to be down to less than 8% vacancies. And so we are maximizing everything we can do to be more agile, to be more effective, and to drive down those vacancies in our workforce and to keep attrition low, which is about 8%. But not all attrition is regretted. And so there is a natural flow, as you know, from a business world that people should go out and do other things if they're not the right fit for defending the nation.
Well, thank you very much for those questions. And I think this committee unanimously supports the importance of cyber, and it'd be a fool's errand to cut that. Just inviting China, inviting Russia, and the other nation states to devastate our small businesses around the country. So thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Trone. Dr. Harris.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for being here with us today. Let me just ask, one thing that we've seen kind of pervasive through the administration is spending money outside for purposes that I will say that don't directly support your mission, or the mission of any agency. Your mission is cybersecurity. So I want to know how much you spend on DEI, because I think that distracts from your mission. I think that the SVB bank collapse shows in spades how distractions on things like DEI distract from what a regulator or a watchdog should be doing. So what part of your budget is spent on DEI?
We don't break it down by diversity, equity, and
Can
inclusion.
you do that for me and get that figure to me? I mean, you have a DEI officer in your...
We do. We do have an office
So
at
they have a salary,
DEIA.
they have an office, they have employees. You can do that for me, can't you?
I will, and I'll get
Okay,
back to you.
because you've asked for an extraordinary increase in personnel costs. So I'm assuming some of that might be to maintain or actually amp up the DEI office. Is that true? Are there plans to actually expand it?
I don't believe there's plans to
Okay,
expand
if you
that
can get back
office,
to me
but
on that,
I will
whether
certainly
when
get back
any of
to you
that
on that.
large increase in
Absolutely.
personnel is a DEI. And just out of curiosity, because in your testimony you say you want to ensure we can hire a diverse and talented workforce. Now, what I want is the person looking after cyber to be the best. So what do you do? Do you have a quota system for diversity? What do you do? Because you want to hire a diverse workforce. How does that work?
No, we don't have quotas or targets. And when I say diverse,
Yes?
I mean diversity of thought.
Oh, well,
So-
let me tell you something. Madam Director, wow. Okay, because we, on our side of the aisle, we've been kind of calling for diversity of thought as the real diversity that doesn't exist in academic institutions, for instance, that doesn't exist in many different things that we fund. So I'm going to leave that line of questioning alone. Let me just ask one other thing, and one of my colleagues may go further on that. Part of your mission is election security, is that right?
That's right.
And disinformation or misinformation with election security. Now,
Foreign influence operations and disinformation.
okay, it has to be foreign. Oh, okay, well, foreign influence. So, for instance, the Hunter Biden laptop was claimed to be a foreign disinformation. I mean, look, they said, look, this is Russia. We had numerous people in the security, and I'm sorry, former intelligence officials who said, oh no, this has all the earmarks of Russian disinformation. So CISA could have been involved. I mean, theoretically, that would fall therefore under what your agency could do. Is that right? Because
No.
it was claimed to be foreign disinformation affecting our election.
No, I don't think we had any involvement, but that was before my time.
I'm not saying it had your involvement, but according to what you said you are disinformation and misinformation on election security. The Hunter Biden laptop was, again, falsely blamed on Russian misinformation or disinformation. So therefore, theoretically, your agency could have been involved in interacting with social media companies to suppress any information on that.
I don't wanna-
Theoretically.
I don't want to talk about theory. What I want to talk about is what our actual mission, what we're doing for state and local election officials who have asked for our help in dealing with foreign influence and disinformation operations, and that is to support them in amplifying their trusted voices and providing them what they need to be able to ensure that the American people have confidence in the integrity of their elections. And this is not a partisan issue, sir, as you know. This is entirely about supporting election officials of all parties, of all affiliation. And as somebody who has served, beat Navy, by the way, as somebody who served in the Army, I'm very, very focused on just making sure we are defending and protecting every constitutional right that exists.
Thank you very much. And look, I'm 2 for 2 because I think both your answers are right. This shouldn't be a political issue, but it was, the Hunter Biden laptop was politicized, and we're trying to figure out at what level of the government's involvement in that politicization. And I'm very glad to hear that you want thought diversity. I'm very glad about, I mean, I'd rather have your employees understand a diverse group of threats as the meaning of diversity. Thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Harris. Ms. Hinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member Cuellar, as well, for holding this hearing today. Director Easterly, it's great to see you again. Thank you so much for meeting with me and answering some of my questions before the hearing today about what you're doing to help reduce cyber threats, also ensure that our critical cyber installations and infrastructure are resilient. So I appreciate that. I know CISA is obviously working to secure cybersecurity and infrastructure, but also to analyze and create tools to help build up that security across various sectors in the country. You mentioned collaborative analysis there. And while that work is, of course, essential to protecting our national security now, what I am most concerned about is the agency's long-term stability and consistency toward that mission and that goal if it's pulled in too many different directions with a focus on maintaining that unified mission. That's really what I want to see you do going forward. So what do you see as CISA's primary function and driving focus? And what steps are you taking to rein in to make sure you're focused on that mission?
Yeah, thank you very much. It was great to meet with you, and I appreciate your leadership. We went through an exercise to ensure that we could create a strategic plan that lays out our goals in a unified way. So what we wanted to do was not to do a whole bunch of different things, just as you said. We wanted to focus on 4 key things. 1, on cyber defense. 2, on infrastructure risk and resilience. 3, on operational collaboration. And 4, on unification. All of that is spelled out in our strategic plan along with our mission, which is to lead the national effort to understand, manage, and reduce risk to the cyber and physical infrastructure that Americans rely on every hour of every day, with the vision of secure and resilient infrastructure for the American people. Every single person in my agency is focused on that very specific mission, and everybody sees themselves in that mission. So focus, 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 continue to invest in those capabilities that will most effectively drive down risk to the nation.
All right, and I look forward to working with our ranking member on his initiatives to hopefully get some ROI and some firm requirements there and some teeth on what we're getting for our dollars. With the ongoing cyber threats, of course, from foreign adversaries, you call them foreign influence operations, like the CCP, which is blatantly targeting Americans' data. Obviously, you mentioned TikTok as well as a huge threat. These are truly attacks on our critical physical infrastructure and on our nation's security. So it's more essential than ever that our cyber platforms are secure. I think we need to be forward-thinking and planning for that next threat. These attacks are happening every single day in mass, and we need to be confident we have guardrails in place to detect. So again, getting back to what you mentioned about collaborative analysis here, without going into too much detail, timing-wise, what preventative measures is CISA utilizing to counter that increased aggression from foreign adversaries like the CCP and Russia? As you mentioned, SolarWinds, we know they're not giving up. So can you just briefly dive into that for me?
Yeah, and we've made significant investments even just the past 2 years, given the lessons learned out of SolarWinds. The thing that I would highlight, because I think to get to that sustainable cybersecurity, we really do need a posture of persistent operational collaboration, a recognition that the government can't do it alone, industry can't do it alone. So that's why the Congress gave us these authorities to build the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative. And we've been working with our partners since August of 2021 to operationalize that. We did it to help drive down risk around a very serious software vulnerability called Log4j. We did it around the Russian invasion of Ukraine, working with our industry partners to come up with a 4-phase plan where we could actually measurably do things if the Russians actually retaliated against our infrastructure. We were bringing in data, we were analyzing it, we were enriching it, and we were creating a picture that allowed us much more ability to actually drive down risk to the nation. So, and we've been expanding it. If you happen to see, if not, I'll get it to you, our JCDC planning agenda, where there's a focus on working with energy companies, a focus on further collaboration on things like high-risk communities, further collaboration with cross-sector entities. So all kinds of things to continue to drive down risk, but collaboration and collective defense is the key to that.
You mentioned it was, I think, 560 new people is what I wrote down. How many of those people would you say are devoted to these types of priorities?
So 516.
16, okay.
Actually. And we have in those priorities, frankly, I mean, I would say collaboration is one of our core values at CISA. So I'd like to say everyone in collaboration because, as you know, we don't do law enforcement, we don't do intel, we don't do military, we're not a traditional regulator, we're a partnership agency. So I think everybody would say they are part of these collaboration efforts. Specifically on the cyber side, that falls within our cyber team, which is about 1,000 people.
Okay, great. Thank you, Director.
Thank
and
you,
I yield
ma'am.
back.
Thank you, Ms. Henson. Mr. Gass, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Easley, thank you again for being here. I want to talk a little bit about the private sector and the hardening of cybersecurity. Would you agree that cost is a major disincentive for private companies to harden their cybersecurity as needed? I'm thinking as we look at today's environment, we've got inflationary costs, which are extremely high. We know the energy costs are up, labor costs are up, input costs are up, and for many in the private sector, it is an allocation of where those dollars are spent. One of the things that I've heard talked about is the possibility of tax credits for private businesses, particularly those in the 16 critical infrastructure sectors, that if they're using those dollars to harden their cybersecurity, that they be given some sort of tax credit for that. Would you be supportive of that as a way to encourage private companies to continue to invest in their cybersecurity? Because we know it's not a one-time expense. It is a continual upgrade, a continual cost that these companies are bearing. And should there not be some sort of tax credits where these companies that are investing to the level approved by CISA would be able then to use some of that as a credit toward taxes to the federal government? Is that something that you would be supportive of?
I haven't studied it, but generally I'm supportive of anything that incentivizes our businesses to make their networks and systems more secure.
And would you agree that cost is a disincentive for some companies as the reason that they don't properly invest in cybersecurity?
Yeah, cost and, frankly, some people look as tech as magic. And so it's hard to get the talent and the skills to be able to secure networks. But I would say, sir, we should stop putting the burden on these small businesses and forcing them to make a decision between mission and security. I go back to technology providers should be baking in security so that we don't have to worry about bolting it on at the back end.
Well, and at some point, if the providers are going to have to continue to do that, I mean, ultimately, that's going to be a cost borne out by someone. And so it seems to me that tax credits would be a logical step to encourage businesses to do that. I know TikTok's been brought up once or twice in this hearing, and I know that last week you probably saw there were lots of conversations about TikTok. As the director of CISA, can you talk a little bit about the threat that TikTok poses?
Yeah, I think anything that is in the control of a foreign adversary, to include our preeminent threat from China, where troves of data, to include data from kids, goes back to a foreign adversary for them to be able to use that data potentially for influence operations, for profiling, I think is a huge, huge risk, which is one of the reasons why TikTok is off federal government devices. And I think we need to be really, really mindful, not just TikTok, that's an important and a prominent issue, but in some ways, sir, It's a tactical issue. It's all sorts of Chinese technology that's in our critical infrastructure supply chain. We need to be very concerned about that. And then frankly, from a strategic level, we need to be very concerned. We know that China for years has been doing espionage and stealing intellectual property, but every foothold for espionage can be a foothold for disruption and destruction. And so we need to be prepared to be able to respond to any type of incursions that might exist on our networks.
And would you be supportive of a ban of TikTok?
Across the country?
Yes.
I would be. I don't know if that is implementable, though.
And then recently, we've seen reports of a data breach at the DC Health Insurance Exchange, which many members of Congress and our staff use that health exchange. Can you talk a little bit about that breach information that you may be able to share in a non-secure setting with myself and the other members of the committee?
I don't want to talk specifically about that. I'd be happy to do it in a closed session to give more information on that, sir.
Are you able to say whether or not that breach occurred as from someone from a foreign adversary, someone, was it, because we know you've got nation states which are conducting cybersecurity threats, there's criminal organizations, and then we've got the lone wolf or the individual actors. Of those three, could you classify which of those three was responsible for the data breach at the DC Health Exchange?
I don't have attribution at hand. I'm happy to get back to you on that, sir. I don't know if final attribution has been made. You know, when you talk about those categories, though, of course you have nation states, but you know many of those cyber criminals are given safe haven and sponsorship by those nation states. So we don't see a lot of these lone actor ones. There's usually some connection there, but I'm happy to get back to you with more specifics.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm out of time, so I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Guest. We will recognize Mr. Cloud upon his return, but we'll go to a second round, and we'll start with the distinguished ranking member, Mr. Cuellar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And let me just add the same thought of thinking on the private sector, trying to find that balance between the carrots and the sticks. And without going into details, I would ask you if you have any suggestions, let us know, because you know one of the things I worry about is I don't want the private sector just depend on the federal government, and at the same time we want the private sector to do its fair share. So that balance is always hard. So I just want to ask if you have any thoughts provided to the committee, and we would appreciate that.
Yes, sir.
On that. Then second of all, I'm now looking at your strategic plan, the vision, the mission, goals, and of course the objectives under each of the goals. And I'm looking at this just right now. I don't think I have a problem with your mission, your goals. I still go back to your, to the performance measures. And I think anybody that's worked with performance measures or strategic plans, it's always hard trying to measure. So I would ask you, if you can, work with us, give us some suggestions, and I would encourage all the members of the committee, like we do, anybody who serve at the state, we get involved with the agency, because if you let, and again, not you, but I've seen some other ones, where if you let the agencies, they'll come up with the measures where they basically are patting themselves in the back, and the difficult ones, it's always hard to do. It's a lot easier to measure activity than it's a lot harder to measure results. So I just want to say, want to work with y'all. Hopefully the committee will be willing and a bipartisan and ask that we all look at the performance measures, not only for your agency, but the other agencies on our homeland. That is it. I want to work with you. And if you have any thoughts, let us know.
Yes, sir, absolutely. I mean, we're not looking for a certificate of participation. We're looking to actually reduce risk to the nation. So I would love to work with you to make sure that we are wisely investing the what you've given us.
Yes, because I think taxpayers always want to see that. Is,
100%.
if we put in $1, they want to know what is the bang for that $1. It's like, in 2020, we invested $650 million. People want to know, what did we get for the $650 million? How is our country safer now?
Yes, sir. Just one thing on this that I'd like to talk about is, there have been ransomware incidents across the country for the last few years now on some of the target-rich cyber poor entities like K through 12 schools, like hospitals, like public utilities. And so we made a very deliberate effort starting in FY23 to actually do outreach to those sectors very purposefully and use some of our cybersecurity performance goals and our free services, both government and industry, to measurably and materially drive down risk by actually implementing the things we put in the CPGs. So what we're looking to do is actually look at the numbers that we know of anyway on incidents for those sectors, and then at the end of the year, both measure the activities, but more importantly, see where we've been able to materially reduce risk. So that may be a way to actually, at an outcome level, start to measure some of the investments that we're making, particularly for some of those cyber poor entities.
Right. And one of the reasons we want to look at the measures is, for example, in your FY24 request, it looks like CISA is shifting resources away from physical security programs in order to be more focused on cybersecurity missions. In other words, I think there's cuts to programs dealing with critical infrastructure, bombing prevention, school safety, and other programs that ensure the security of public gathering spaces. That's why those measures are going to be important. Any reason why you're requesting reduction on some of those physical infrastructure that I mentioned, school safety and other programs like that?
So in a very tight budget year, we had to make some really tough choices. We just didn't annualize. It's the same request from the president's budget in 23. You all were very generous with plussing us up in those areas. We just didn't annualize it because we had to make really tough choices. If the committee looks to put back money in school safety, which I think is $3 million, and in the Office of Bombing Prevention, which was $9 million, we could certainly do stuff with it.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, thank you so much.
More than welcome, Ranking Member Cuellar. Ms. Henson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Quick follow-up. We talked a lot about TikTok already, so I don't need to beat a dead horse here, but are there other platforms that you're very concerned about that maybe we are not paying as much of attention to? Because obviously we're having a lot of hearings about TikTok. We're having a lot of discussions about it. What's the next thing that we're worried about?
Yeah. So in terms of those types of capabilities and platforms, I wouldn't, name a specific one. But what I will say I'm very concerned about is some of the emerging capabilities, specifically in artificial intelligence, which can be used by threat actors like China for weaponization of cyber, weaponization of genetic engineering, weaponization of bioweapons. And I'm a techno-optimist generally. I've seen technology save lives and do amazing things for our national security, but I have concerns in my role to see the rapid acceleration, almost the frantic pace of the implementation of some of this technology into actual things that we're using on a daily basis. And I do not think that there are the right guardrails in place to be able to assure us that this is not going to have cascading massive impacts on our safety. So those are the things that we're starting to work on as part of our overall technology safety efforts, is the safety of artificial intelligence, because I think we're going too fast and we don't know what's at the other end. And I think our adversaries can use this technology in very, very damaging ways, and we need to more fully understand that.
Right, they're weaponizing that information, as you said, to influence as well. But you did mention something that's very important there, technology used to save lives, which is a critical part of our mission, I think, as members of Congress, but also in what you do. And in my district in Iowa, we obviously know how important it is to make sure that those safety tools and emergency communication systems are up and running well, and that they can deliver that life-saving information, those alerts to people. We saw a failure in Iowa recently. We had some tornadoes about a year ago, and some people died. So I would just be encouraged to hear a little bit more from you about what steps CISA is doing to ensure that our emergency comms networks are resilient, strong, and operating correctly, so we can avoid having a repeat of what happened in Iowa.
Yeah, thanks so much for that question. So our Emergency Communications Division is so important. It really grew out of the entities that came out of 9/11, SAFECOM, and now the National Council for Statewide Interoperable Coordinators. So what we work on, along with all of we have ECCs, Emergency Comms Coordinators, in every region. we are focused on working with the public safety community and the emergency responders to ensure that their comms are secure, resilient, and interoperable. So of course, it's emergency communications month coming up in April, and we've got a full court press to make sure that we are bringing on more of these entities into our government emergency telecommunications system and our wireless priority system. So when there are significant hazards or incidents, we can switch over to those capabilities and can be able to provide that same emergency comm. So day in, day out, working on collaborative planning, working on creating resilience. We're providing tools and assistance to the public safety community, and just incredibly important. And I'd love to follow up with you on this, because I think our work in this space is, it's only really noticed when you have incidents like you had in Iowa, when you can't use your 911, but critical to the security of the nation.
Yeah, and obviously the derecho came through, and people had no way to communicate even with the governor's office. In my community, we're trying to get a hold of her, and they couldn't, right? I mean, so that's a huge challenge. So I think what's important is redundancies there to make sure that you mentioned resilience, but obviously our threat actors that we're competing with and trying to counter, they're obviously looking for any vulnerability there. So that's a huge concern. And I want to wrap up with just a question about supply chain vulnerabilities as far as hard infrastructure is concerned, because obviously we are coming out of a major pandemic. We learned a lot of lessons about the supply chain in general, but what do you see as the biggest challenges there in terms of threats or vulnerabilities?
Yeah, I think the biggest issue, and we run, as you probably know, the Information Communications Technology Supply Chain Risk Management Task Force with many of our partners. But I just say that the biggest issue are that some of these supply chains are run by small businesses. And so these entities are part of this target-rich, cyber-poor group of people that, the person doing HR is the person doing IT, is the person doing finance. And some of these entities are within our critical infrastructure. And so one of the things I was most excited about is we created these cybersecurity performance goals. Now, the gold standard for risk management is the NIST cybersecurity framework, and that's what we used at Morgan Stanley, for example. But if you're a small business, you look at that and it's just intimidating. So what we wanted to do was really take that document and distill it down to less than 40 things that can be done, characterized by cost, complexity, and impact to drive down risk. And we're most excited about being able to use that into some of these small companies that sit within the supply chain to really materially drive down risk, because that'll make us all safer, just given how interconnected, how digitized, and how vulnerable we are because of some of those supply chain components. The last thing I'd say is we need to also look at some of the Chinese technology that's within our supply chains. FCC has a list of some of this technology that they are looking to come out of communications, but we are actually, because we have vulnerability scanning of the public internet, we can see some of these technologies in critical infrastructure. We've actually done outreach now to, I think, 120 entities to let them know, hey, you've got Huawei, you've got Hikvision, you've got ZTE, you need to, you should think to pull that out because it's creating risk in your network. So we need to do that as well.
Well, thank you, Director Easterly, and I look forward to working with you, Mr. Chairman, to maybe act on some of those challenges that she just mentioned. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ms. Henson. Recognizing Mr. Cloud for this initial round of questions.
Thank you so much for being here and sharing your insight with us. I wanted to tackle, we all certainly want to guard our cyber infrastructure, and that's a bipartisan goal. A lot of Americans right now are concerned about maybe some of the mission creep that's happened recently. And you started, I guess it was in July 2021. And then shortly after that, not that you did this, but in September, there was an effort to start a disinformation governance board, and there was a lot of pushback from that. But part of that memo said that CISA would be involved in flagging content for censorship on social media platforms leading up to the 2020 election. And then we know that CISA played a key role in working with outside organizations such as the Election Integrity Partnership to censor information about the Hunter Biden laptop story. What are you doing to make sure that that kind of thing doesn't happen again?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Congressman. Just to be totally crystal clear, as I think you'd want me to be, we don't censor anything, and as someone who served as a combat
No, but you
veteran, that
recommend to Twitter and to
But
social media
we
organizations
don't-
or flag things for
we
them that
don't
could be
flag anything
considered?
to social media organizations at all. We are focused on building resilience to foreign influence and disinformation. So we do not do any censorship, and I just want to make that incredibly clear.
Okay. On March 7th, Biden issued an executive order 14-019, directing all federal agencies to develop voter registration and voter education plans to be submitted to the White House and OMB by September 2021. My understanding is that CISA has submitted a plan to the White House. Is that correct?
I need to go back on that. If September 2021, I don't know, sir, I'll go back and check on that.
Okay. There's been a number of FOIA requests to get copies of these plans.
Yeah.
And I would like to see if you could
Voter
submit it.
registration, sir, can you help me understand the question?
Biden issued an executive directive order directing all federal agencies to develop a voter registration and voter education plan to be submitted to the White House. And my understanding is that CISA did submit one,
Yeah.
but there's been some FOIA requests, and government-wide, there's been a lot of non-transparency in delivering on those plans when it comes to FOIA requests. And would you be able to get us a copy of that plan?
Yeah, 100%. And you know, at the end of the day, happy to be completely transparent. Transparency builds trust.
Yeah.
That's our job. Elections and voting is not a partisan issue. We
Sure.
work with all parties, all affiliation. We're just trying to make sure that whether you're Republican, whether you're Democrat, election officials have what they need to be able to run safe and secure
neither.
elections, as you'd want us to.
Sure. One of the issues we have when we're looking at budgets is a lot of the line items we send or will fund, the line item is great, a lot of bipartisan support for it, but a lot of the action that would be questionable is in the grant writing process. But it's hard to have transparency on that because there's very little transparency on where the grants are going, who the grants are going to, what particular NGOs, even how the contracting is happening. Can you work with us on getting us a copy of everyone that's received any sort of grant or contract for the last 2 years through CISA?
Yeah, absolutely. Are you talking about the grants? The one that we are most directly involved in managing is the state and local cybersecurity grant program that's really dedicated to state and local. So, you know, as you can imagine, a lot of that capabilities at the state and local level don't have a lot of resources. And so we want to make sure that the state of Texas or the jurisdictions have what they need to keep their networks and systems secure. But happy to get you whatever you'd like.
Well, thank you very much, and I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cloud. Recognize Ms. Underwood for the second round of questions.
Thanks so much, Mr. Chairman. Director Easterly, I know you've placed a lot of emphasis on these target-rich, resource-poor, critical infrastructure sectors. In Northern Illinois, we have a lot of rural and suburban communities with schools, small businesses, public works facilities, and hospitals that lack the resources to combat the evolving 21st century landscape of cyber threats. Yet these are vital services for our communities, and we rely on them every day, and they're responsible for a lot of data. What are some of the most target-rich, resource-poor critical infrastructure sectors and subsectors, and what is CISA doing to help those owners and operators mitigate the specific risks they face?
Yeah, thanks very much for that question. What we wanted to do is look at those entities that were most targeted by ransomware over the past year, and then really focus in a way where we could measurably drive down risk, leveraging the cybersecurity performance goals and then the no-cost vulnerability assessments and some of the tools that we have. So we chose K through 12 school districts. And we wrote, if you haven't seen it, we actually did this great report with the school entities about what are the tools that can most help schools that don't have a lot of resources there. So we're focused on that. We are focused on public utilities like water facilities, because
Great.
I'm very concerned about that. And we're focused on hospitals, particularly some of the smaller hospitals. I know you have an appreciation for that, because making a decision between a surgeon on whether you upgrade your software shouldn't have to make those decisions. So we brought the CEO for Atlantic Healthcare on our board. We brought somebody that does public utilities in New Hampshire. We brought somebody who heads a K through 12 nonprofit to help advise us and connect us with those communities to drive down that risk using some of these new tools that we have. By the way, we actually followed up on Wabansi. Thank you for raising that
Excellent.
to make sure that they have what they need to drive down risk.
Excellent, thank you. I see small local governments as another example of a target-rich, resource-poor entity. My Resilience Act would target CISA's resources through outreach and pilot programs to rural and suburban communities that don't have the resources to defend against every cyber and physical threat. Can you provide an update on CISA's current work to help local governments protect themselves from emerging threats?
Yeah, absolutely. The thing I think we're most excited about here is the grant program, the state and local cyber grant program. 2 states opted out of it. We have 54 states and territories that are going to do it. We just received 12 of the first proposals for the first year.
Yeah.
We just approved 10 of them. Info went out to those 10. FEMA's in the process of just validating that, and the money should be out the door within the next couple weeks. And so we look forward to seeing those other 44 by September, and that's as you know, that goes for several years. And there's a matching component. So we don't want to have this sort of, we understand cyber poor, but we don't want to have a moral hazard. We want to teach a person to fish. So at the end of the day, there's some matching that occurs at the state level.
Yep.
And then we're going to provide assistance to ensure that they are continuing to raise their baseline so that they can drive down risk.
Excellent. Now, I understand there's been a larger national conversation, and Republican leadership has put forward a plan to involve some cuts. We received a letter from the Secretary outlining the impact of some cuts, including a note about state and local impacts, which says that budget cuts would lead to a 13% reduction in CISA's regional field forces, and the regional workforce is a critical component of CISA's service delivery model. I'm about putting people over politics, and I think that CISA's value and impact for our local communities is unmatched and would certainly not support this type of devastating cut. Wondering if you might want to expand on the impact of such a reduction.
Thank you. I completely agree. If we have any of the cuts, if we get pushed back to 22, it will severely negatively impact what we've been able to do with state and local partners and with those smaller critical infrastructure owners and operators around the country. Over the past 2 years, we've added significant forces, cybersecurity advisors, cybersecurity state coordinators, protective security advisors that are on the ground, the tip of the spear, providing our no-cost resources, capabilities, and tools to drive down risk to this nation in an environment where there are very serious nation-state threats and cyber criminals that are sponsored by those nation-states. So I would be very concerned about any cuts to those capabilities, as well as any capabilities of the things that we asked for, because that'll put us back in a pre-solar winds world where we'll lose that visibility that we've developed, and that's harmful to our security as a nation.
Harmful to our security as a nation, limits our ability to meet the demand from our state and local partners who, as I understand it, are asking for support, and these PSAs and CSAs are oversubscribed as is. And so we can't let a 13% reduction move forward. Thank you so much, Director, for being here. I yield back.
Sheriff Rutherford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to follow up on that. In my absence, I know Ms. Henson talked about our foreign adversaries, and Mr. Guest talked about TikTok, so a lot of my questions have already been asked in my absence. And I know Mr. Trone spoke of staffing, as did Ms. Underwood just now, and I want to follow up on that because I will tell you that's, I think, one of the most important issues we have going forward is what are the national staffing needs for cyber-trained individuals, and what are we doing about it? And what are your needs from a staffing standpoint, and what are we doing about it? And so can you talk a little, and I guess my question too is that in your mission to help develop capability out there, human capability out there?
Absolutely. So just to talk about CISA specifically, as I mentioned, we have a full court press on hiring. We are projected to hire up to 600 people this year. That'll drive down our vacancies. And that's, we have grown, I think, 13% over the past couple years, given some of the new budgets. So now we're at a place where we're going to be able to drive down vacancies because we haven't asked for, I think, 11 new positions with this budget. So I am very confident that we'll have the capacity and capability to defend the nation as America's cyber defense agency. With respect to the rest of the country, so the stats are something like 3.5 million unfilled cybersecurity jobs globally, 700,000 in the U.S., and about 35,000 in the federal government. So from a federal government perspective, we are working on things like we run reskilling programs for people who want to
I'm sorry, say that?
like reskilling programs. So 3-month course for people who want to move from what they're doing into cyber and get reskilling training. So we do that. We do the Federal Virtual Training Academy where you can go on and learn about cyber through webinars. And then we also, importantly, we work across the nation because I think this has to be, frankly, from what I call K through gray.
Right.
And K through 12 is really important. I just saw North Dakota actually mandated cybersecurity in their K through 12 education. I think every state should do that, frankly, because our kids are digital natives while we're all digital immigrants. They're very facile on their devices and quite frankly, but they don't know how to protect themselves. So they need to learn at a very young age how to protect themselves. So we actually have a grantee in Louisiana, Cyber Innovation Center, and we work with them to provide curriculum to train the trainer for teachers all across the nation in every state. And I think more of that program is really, really important as we dig in and help our younger folks get more facile on cyber. It's got to be a national thing. It can't just be the federal government.
All righty. And can you, I want to ask you personally, because I trust you a lot.
Thank you, sir.
This whole TikTok thing, I have to tell you, I'm a little torn. I don't like censorship, but I don't know enough about what our full reasons are about going after TikTok. Can you talk about that a little bit and where you come down on that issue?
Yeah, thanks, Sheriff. So the data right now from TikTok that a lot of kids use, I think 130 million Americans, that's a lot, is basically goes back to China. And, frankly, for those who talked about, we can be more, we can compete economically and this can be a partner, I don't see us turning in that way. I very much worry about the threat from China to our nation, and I very much worry about what they're going to do with all of that data to weaponize it for influence operations. Particularly, I'm worried about that, as I've said throughout the hearing, foreign influence operations during our elections. Yeah. The Chinese have a well-known doctrine of cognitive domain operations. They are focused on influence operations against the American people to sow discord, to sow distrust, to undermine our confidence in the core foundations of our democracy. This is why I'm concerned about so much data that is going right back to an adversary nation. And I agree with you. We don't censor. I spent 21 years in the Army and 3 times in combat zones serving the nation, sworn to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. We don't censor anything. What we want to do is to ensure that we are building resilience and securing our nation from the type of threats that we are going to be dealing with in a really serious way. And China is where we need to be focused.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Sheriff. Mr. Trone.
I'd just like to comment that I think where the sheriff is going there is really right on point, and it's so good to hear you talk about that and explain that to us. And I really appreciate that. It really helps me. And I couldn't agree with the sheriff more on the importance of building that pipeline of workers to get into cyber. And if we see we're falling behind, like we have fallen behind on addiction specialists, therapists, psychologists, a lot of folks in the medical fields, we're doing things to help fill those needs. But if we see the problem here, you got to come to us, and we can think about ways we can put tax credits, tuition refunds, get our kids in this area that's going to be such great jobs in the future that really pay well. And the other comment would be is I really thought Mr. Guest had some great comments about, maybe some tax credit ideas on our small business. A bigger business like myself, we get it, we're all in. But these small businesses, I was there one time, and you always think short term. You're just working on getting payroll Friday. And you got to think long term, when you look at cyber, because it's going to devastate you. You won't be able to recover. So if we give them some sort of credit, that kind of gets them in the swimming pool, so to speak, and gets their feet wet. And then all of a sudden they realize, wow, this could be bad. Then they're going to figure out how to get some of their own resources, go to places like the chamber we talked about earlier, and be successful. And we can support those small businesses, which are the future of our country, is small business in America. So we should continue to think about that, Mr. Chairman, and ideas. I think they should be very bipartisan, and we'd all support that. Last thing I want to mention was on TikTok. You had talked to me a little bit about how TikTok looks at differently in China and how it works in China versus how TikTok works here, and how I think you said a dumbing down of 130 million Americans. So they're just dumbed down looking at dogs and cats and animal tricks, and versus thinking about reading a book, about philosophy or English literature, some things that really could help us. So talk about that, how it's different in China.
Yeah. And my friend Tristan Harris, who was one of the founders of the Center for Humane Technology, actually talked about this. I think it was on 60 Minutes several months ago. It's this idea of spinach TikTok. So the controls that are placed by the Chinese on how TikTok is used within their nation, restricted time. There's not the, I'm not ideologically opposed to cat videos, but at the end of the day, cat videos versus videos about museums and Nobel Prize winners. And so this is really different from what our kids here are seeing versus what kids in China are seeing.
Kids in China are seeing what?
Seeing much more educational videos, and they're restricted in terms of timing. And so, when you think about what our kids are seeing here versus there, it's I think part of an overall strategy to impact how our kids are being educated. And I worry a lot about it, both as the director of CISA, but also as a mom. And I think we all, as parents, as citizens, as of this nation, we all need to be focused on really how to be a good ancestor, frankly. What is my great-grandkids going to think about, these what I call weapons of mass distraction and all of the sort of tools, which frankly we should, read a damn book, right? At the end of the day. And so I'm with you. And again, there's some cool stuff going on in this technology, but I think we need to be very mindful about how it's impacting the next generation.
You nailed it. Thanks for your insights. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Trone. I agree that reading books allow one's imagination to flourish.
Yes, sir.
And taking my second question of this round, hypothetically, what would a full-fledged nation-state actor attack on our critical infrastructure look like? And what are we doing to prepare for that worst-case scenario?
Yeah, thank you for asking. I often get asked what keeps me up at night.
Yeah.
This is part of it. A lot of things is the answer. So, you saw, I'm sure, the Intel Community Assessment that came out a couple weeks ago, and it's very clear in there. We are still focused on the threat from Russia. We are still vigilant. We are still keeping our shields up, knowing that we are not out of the woods in terms of retaliation on our infrastructure. But to me, the focus needs to be on China. China is the preeminent threat. And so what I worry about is a scenario where in the next 3 to 6 years, China decides to reunify with Taiwan, whether that's an invasion or a blockade of the Straits. But at the same time, I think we're very likely to see attacks here in the homeland. Remember, China is looking at Russia and Ukraine, and they're learning lessons just as we are learning lessons. And I think they're costing in the impact of what an escalatory attack would look like. And so I think we would see attacks against pipelines, because the big lesson of Colonial Pipeline is what a great way to create panic, to incite societal panic, to essentially upend how Americans are thinking about their safety and security. So I would see attacks on pipelines, attacks on transportation, attacks on water facilities, all of which, again, induce societal panic, delay mobilization of our military forces, and really get the American people to say, look, I don't want to worry about that place out there. I really just want to worry about getting to work and getting my gas and getting my health care and being able to communicate. And so I think that's the kind of thing that we can see. I think that's a more than likely scenario, and certainly if you read in the intel. So what are we doing? We are aggressively doing everything we can, working with our partners, our industry partners, our partners in every sector to ensure they understand the threat and they are taking aggressive measures to drive down risk. If they're some of the smaller entities, it's using some of the no-cost tools and the capabilities like our cyber performance goals to drive down that risk. If it's some of the bigger companies, we're working with them to ensure that we're sharing information to allow us to have a consolidated threat picture so that we can actually drive down risk to the nation. But this, to me, sir, it's not about prevention at the end of the day. It is about resilience. Because in this highly connected, highly vulnerable world, it is very hard to prevent bad things from happening. We need to expect disruption. We need to ensure that we have redundant communications, that we're prepared to recover, that we have manual overrides, that we can actually withstand an attack and then get back up and have the country running in a very short period of time. That's the mentality and the culture that we all need to be focused on across the nation to be able to deal with these threats.
Thank you, and Godspeed in getting to that.
Thanks, Chairman.
Without any further ado, members of the subcommittee may have some additional questions. I know both Mr. Harris and Mr. Cloud have asked for some responses from you. Would 15 business days from today give you enough time to respond?
Yes, sir, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. And anybody else who'd like to send a written question in a timely manner, get their responses during that time. But I also want to thank you again for being here today, and this subcommittee stands adjourned.
Thanks, Chairman.